The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878, as Sabrina Newfield clutched her basket of healing herbs to her chest and quickened her pace, the whispers following her like shadows. She had only stopped to deliver a remedy to old Mrs. Jenkins, whose arthritis had flared something terrible with the changing seasons, but even that small kindness couldn't be accomplished without the sideways glances and muttered prayers. "The devil's work," came a harsh voice from behind her. "Mark my words." Sabrina didn't turn. She knew that voice all too well. Reverend Thomas Blackwood, who had made it his personal mission to drive her from Redemption Creek since the day she'd arrived 2 years prior. A traveling doctor had taught her the healing properties of plants during her childhood in Missouri, and that knowledge had saved more than one life in this frontier town. Yet to the Reverend, a woman with such skills could only be in league with Satan himself. "Good day, Reverend," she said quietly, continuing on her way, her chestnut hair escaping its pins in the warm spring breeze. At 22, Sabrina had already endured more suspicion and hostility than most faced in a lifetime. "There is nothing good about a day when you walk freely among God-fearing people," the Reverend called after her, his Bible clutched tightly in one hand. "Your potions and spells bring only suffering." Sabrina quickened her pace, the dried lavender and yarrow in her basket rustling with each step. She'd never cast a spell in her life, but facts mattered little to those who had already made up their minds. The drought that had parched the region last summer, her fault. The influenza that had taken 3 children in the winter, also her doing, according to Blackwood's fiery Sunday sermons. She was nearly at the edge of town when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her pause. A rider was coming in fast from the western trail, his horse kicking up clouds of dust. As he drew closer, Sabrina recognized Vaughn Lawson, one of the most successful cattle ranchers in the territory. His Broken Arrow Ranch employed half the men in the county, and his cattle drives to Cheyenne were the stuff of local legend. Lawson pulled his chestnut stallion to a halt right beside her, his tall frame casting a shadow across her path. At 30 years old, he was known as much for his fairness as for his fierce independence. Unlike most in town, he had never shown any interest in the Reverend's crusade against her. "Miss Newfield," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep with a hint of Virginia in its cadence. "I was hoping to find you." Sabrina looked up, surprised. Though she had treated some of his ranch hands over the years, she and Vaughn Lawson had rarely exchanged more than polite greetings. "Mr. Lawson, is someone ill at your ranch?" His face was grim beneath the shadow of his hat. "It's my foreman, Frank Pearson. Took a fall from his horse while checking the north fence line, his legs broken, bad bones sticking right through the skin. My men brought him to the ranch house, but he's in a terrible way." "Have you sent for Dr. Miller?" she asked, already knowing the answer. The town's only physician had left 3 weeks ago to visit his ailing mother in Denver. "He's still gone," Vaughn confirmed. "Miss Newfield, I know what folks say about you, but I've seen the good you've done. Frank's a good man with a wife and 3 little ones. He needs help now." Behind them, Reverend Blackwood had drawn closer, his expression thunderous. "Lawson, you would bring that witch to your home. Have you no fear of God's judgment?" Vaughn's jaw tightened as he turned to face the preacher. "What I fear, Reverend, is a good man dying when someone with the knowledge to help him stands right here." His voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the words. "I've watched Miss Newfield heal folks that Dr. Miller had given up for lost. I've seen children recover under her care when you were already preparing their funeral sermons." The Reverend's face reddened. "She is cursed. Her very presence brings calamity." Vaughn straightened in his saddle, one hand resting on the horn. "She's no such thing. She's a blessing to this territory, and I'll not stand by while a man suffers for your superstition." He turned back to Sabrina, extending his hand down to her. "Miss Newfield, will you come?" Sabrina hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. In one smooth motion, Vaughn pulled her up behind him on the saddle. "This will not be forgotten, Lawson," the Reverend called after them as Vaughn turned his horse toward the ranch. "No good will come of harboring that woman." "Hold tight," Vaughn said over his shoulder, and Sabrina hesitantly placed her hands at his waist as the horse broke into a gallop. The Broken Arrow Ranch lay 7 miles west of town, a sprawling operation that encompassed some of the best grazing land in the territory. They rode in silence, the urgency of their mission making conversation unnecessary. Sabrina could feel the solid strength of Vaughn Lawson as she held on, and despite the circumstances, she found herself noticing the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. As they approached the ranch house, Sabrina saw several men gathered on the wide porch. The building itself was impressive 2 stories of sturdy timber with glass windows, a rare luxury on the frontier. Vaughn brought the horse to a stop in front of the house and quickly dismounted, turning to help Sabrina down. "He's inside," he said, leading her up the steps. The men moved him to the spare bedroom. The interior of the ranch house was as impressive as its exterior: polished wood floors, actual upholstered furniture, and framed paintings on the walls. But Sabrina had no time to admire the surroundings as she followed Vaughn to a room at the back of the house where a man lay on the bed, his face gray with pain. "Frank, Miss Newfield is here to help," Vaughn said, stepping aside to let Sabrina approach. The injured man's leg was a gruesome sight. The bone had indeed broken through the skin, and the wound was already showing signs of infection. Frank's wife, a small woman with worried eyes, stood at the head of the bed, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth. "Thank you for coming," she whispered to Sabrina. "He's burning with fever." Sabrina set her basket on a nearby table and began removing what she needed. "I'll need clean water, as hot as you can get it," she said to Vaughn, "and whiskey the strongest you have." While Vaughn went to fetch the items, Sabrina spoke gently to Frank and his wife, explaining what needed to be done. "The bone must be set, and quickly, before the infection worsens. It will be painful but necessary." When Vaughn returned with the water and whiskey, Sabrina soaked clean cloths in the hot water and carefully cleaned the wound. She then prepared a bitter-smelling poultice of herbs from her basket. "This will help fight the infection," she explained, applying the mixture to the wound. "Now comes the difficult part. Mr. Lawson, I'll need you and 2 of your strongest men to hold him down. Mrs. Pearson, perhaps you should wait outside." "I'll stay," Frank's wife said firmly. "He'll want me here." Vaughn called in 2 ranch hands, and together they positioned themselves to hold Frank steady. Sabrina gave the injured man a healthy dose of whiskey, then waited until his eyes grew slightly unfocused. "On my count," she said, positioning her hands on either side of the break. 1, 2, she pulled sharply on 3, manipulating the bone back into place with a sickening sound. Frank's scream echoed through the house despite the whiskey, but the worst was over quickly. Sabrina worked efficiently, splinting the leg and applying more of her healing poultice before wrapping the limb tightly. "He'll need rest, and the poultice changed twice daily," she instructed, wiping her hands clean. "Keep him cool if the fever rises and make sure he drinks plenty of water. I've left enough of the herbs to last a week. By then, we should know if the infection is clearing." Mrs. Pearson clasped Sabrina's hands in her own. "Thank you. The children need their father." Exhausted from the intensity of the procedure, Sabrina stepped outside onto the porch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. She took a deep breath of the cool evening air, trying to clear her head of the smell of blood and infection. "You have a gift," Vaughn said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "I've never seen anyone work with such sure hands." Sabrina smiled faintly. "My father was a trapper. He taught me to be steady under pressure. The healing knowledge came later from an old doctor who stayed with us one winter when I was a girl. Not witchcraft then." Vaughn's tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "Just knowledge and practice, Mr. Lawson. Plants contain powerful medicine if you know how to use them. There's nothing magical about it." He nodded, leaning against a porch post. "I never believed Blackwood's nonsense. A man in my position can't afford to ignore skill and competence, regardless of where it comes from." He studied her for a moment. "Why do you stay in Redemption Creek? Surely there are places where your abilities would be more appreciated." Sabrina turned to face the sunset. "My mother is buried there, and besides, where would I go? One town is much like another for a woman alone. They stood in companionable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. Finally, Vaughn straightened. "It's too late for you to return to town tonight. We have plenty of room here. My housekeeper, Mrs. Connolly, will show you to a guest room." "Thank you," Sabrina said, suddenly aware of how tired she truly was. "I would appreciate that." Over the next week, Sabrina visited the ranch daily to check on Frank's progress. The infection receded, and the bone began to knit together properly. Each visit brought her into Vaughn's company, and she found herself looking forward to their conversations. Unlike most men she'd known, he seemed genuinely interested in her knowledge, asking questions about the properties of different plants and how she determined which to use. On her 7th visit, Sabrina arrived to find Frank sitting up in bed, his color much improved. "The fever's gone completely," Mrs. Pearson reported happily, "and he kept down a full breakfast this morning." "Excellent," Sabrina said, examining the leg. "The wound is healing nicely. You'll need to keep it splinted for at least another month, but I believe the worst is behind us." After finishing her examination, Sabrina found Vaughn waiting for her outside. "Would you care to see the rest of the ranch?" he asked. "I have my mare saddled for you." Surprised but pleased, Sabrina accepted the invitation. They rode side by side across the rolling grasslands of the Broken Arrow, Vaughn pointing out various landmarks and explaining his operation. He had built the ranch from nothing after coming west following the war between the states, starting with just 20 head of cattle and gradually expanding until he now ran over 2,000. "It's beautiful," Sabrina said as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a meandering creek where a small herd grazed peacefully. "You've created something remarkable here." "It's missing something, though," Vaughn said, his eyes on the distant mountains. "A ranch this size needs a family to give it purpose beyond just profit." Sabrina felt a strange tightness in her chest at his words. "I'm sure you'll find a suitable wife in time. There must be plenty of young ladies in Cheyenne eager to catch your eye." Vaughn turned to look at her directly, his expression unreadable. "I've never been much interested in the ladies of Cheyenne. They seem to want a husband who will keep them in fancy dresses and never let them soil their hands." He paused. "I'd prefer a woman of substance. Someone who isn't afraid of hard work and has the courage of her convictions." Before Sabrina could respond, a distant shout caught their attention. One of Vaughn's ranch hands was riding toward them at full gallop. "Mr. Lawson," the man called as he drew near. "Trouble in town." The Reverends got people all fired up. "They're saying Miss Newfield bewitched Frank into getting better, and now they're talking about coming out here to cleanse the ranch." Vaughn's expression darkened. "How many?" "About 15 men when I left, but they were still gathering." "Blackwood's been preaching all morning about purging evil." Vaughn turned to Sabrina, his voice urgent. "We need to get back to the ranch house, now." They rode hard back to the main buildings, where Vaughn quickly gathered his men. "I want the women and children in the main house," he ordered. "Arm yourselves, but no shooting unless I give the word. These are our neighbors, even if they're acting like fools." Inside the house, Sabrina helped Mrs. Connolly gather supplies, her hands shaking slightly. "This is my fault," she said. "I should never have come here." "Nonsense," the older woman replied firmly. "You saved Frank's life. The Reverends had it in for you since you arrived and showed up his divine healing nonsense. He's just a man who can't stand being proven wrong." An hour later, they heard the approach of horses. Vaughn positioned his men around the property, then came to find Sabrina in the kitchen. "Stay inside," he told her. "This is between me and Blackwood." "It's me they want," Sabrina protested. "I won't hide while you face danger on my account." Vaughn's expression softened. "Sabrina, he stopped, seeming to search for words. "Just stay safe, please." From the window, Sabrina watched as Reverend Blackwood led a group of town men to the edge of the ranch yard. Some carried torches despite the daylight, others had rifles slung across their saddles. "Lawson." Blackwood called out. "Send out the witch, we know she's here." Vaughn walked out alone to meet them, his hands visible at his sides. "There's no witch here, Reverend, just a skilled healer who saved my foreman's life. She has bewitched you," Blackwood declared, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "Just as she has bewitched others, her evil must be cleansed from our community." The only evil I see is a mob threatening peaceful folk, Vaughn replied calmly. Frank Pearson is recovering because of Miss Newfield's knowledge and care. There was no witchcraft, just skill and compassion. She consorts with the devil, one of the townsmen shouted. She saved my children when the fever came last winter, came another voice, Mrs. Pearson, stepping out from the house despite the danger. When your prayers did nothing, Reverend, her medicines brought my babies back from death's door. Other voices joined hers, one of the ranch hands whose wife had survived a difficult childbirth thanks to Sabrina's help, another whose badly infected arm she had saved from amputation. Sabrina couldn't stay hidden any longer. Despite Vaughn's instructions, she walked out onto the porch, her heart pounding but her head held high. "If you want me, I am here," she called out. "I have never harmed anyone in this community. I have only tried to ease suffering where I could." Reverend Blackwood pointed at her dramatically. "See how she flaunts her defiance. The scripture tells us, 'Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.' The scripture also says, 'By their fruits ye shall know them,'" Vaughn countered, moving to stand beside Sabrina. "What fruits has Miss Newfield produced but healing and comfort?" "What fruits have you produced today but hatred and violence?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Several men looked uncomfortable, shifting in their saddles. "She is cursed," Blackwood insisted, but his voice held less conviction now. "She is not cursed," Vaughn said firmly. "She is blessed with knowledge and compassion, and I am blessed to know her." He turned to face the townspeople directly. "This woman is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me and every man who works for me." The ranch hands moved to stand with their boss, weapons at the ready but not aimed. The show of solidarity was unmistakable. "You would choose her over your standing in the community," Blackwood demanded. Vaughn's voice rang out clear and strong. "She is my blessing, not my curse. And any man who can't see that is blind to what truly matters in this life." The standoff continued for several tense moments before Sheriff Wilson, who had been hanging back from the main group, finally rode forward. "That's enough, Reverend," he said. "There's no law against healing folks, and I'll not be party to a lynching based on superstition." He turned to the gathered men. "Go home, all of you. There's nothing to be done here that wouldn't bring shame to Redemption Creek." Slowly, reluctantly, the mob began to disperse. Blackwood, his face contorted with anger, pointed one last time at Sabrina. "This isn't over," he threatened before turning his horse and riding away. As the dust settled, Sabrina turned to Vaughn, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one has ever stood up for me like that." Vaughn took her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of ranch work. "I meant what I said. You are a blessing, Sabrina Newfield, to this community, to my ranch." He paused, seemed to gather his courage, "and to me." In the days that followed, Sabrina remained at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Word of the confrontation spread throughout the territory, and gradually, the tide of public opinion began to shift. People who had benefited from Sabrina's healing came forward with their stories, and even some of Blackwood's most devoted followers began to question his crusade. One evening, 2 weeks after the standoff, Sabrina sat on the porch watching the sunset. Vaughn joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I received a letter today," he said after a comfortable silence. "From the territorial governor. It seems he's heard about our local preacher's behavior and is concerned about false accusations leading to violence. He's sending a circuit judge to look into the matter." Sabrina turned to him, surprised. "The governor knows about Redemption Creek," Vaughn smiled slightly. "We've met a few times in Cheyenne. I may have mentioned the situation in my last cattle contract negotiation. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." His expression grew serious. "Sabrina, you shouldn't have to live in fear. No one should be persecuted for using the gifts they've been given to help others." She studied his face in the fading light, seeing the determination there, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. "There's something else I need to say," Vaughn continued, taking her hands in his. "These past weeks, having you here at the ranch, it's shown me what I've been missing all these years. Not just a healer for my workers, but a partner. Someone who sees the world as I do, as a place where actions matter more than words, where a person's worth is measured by the good they do." Sabrina felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the evening sun. "Vaughn, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Sabrina Newfield. I love your courage, your compassion, your unwavering commitment to helping others even when it costs you dearly." He took a deep breath. "And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never face such accusations alone again." Tears sprang to Sabrina's eyes. "Are you certain? The Reverend won't give up easily. Being associated with me could cost you business, friendships." "None of that matters," Vaughn said firmly. "What matters is that I've found the woman I want to build a life with, the woman who makes this ranch a home." He smiled, a tender expression that transformed his normally serious face. "So what do you say? Will you be my blessing, my bride, my forever?" Sabrina didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, leaning forward to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Vaughn pulled her closer, his arms strong and secure around her. When they finally parted, both breathless, Sabrina laid her head against his chest. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have since that day you came to town and stood up to the Reverend for me. Then I'm glad Frank broke his leg," Vaughn chuckled, earning a playful swat from Sabrina. "That's a terrible thing to say, but true nonetheless." He kissed her forehead. Sometimes blessings come in strange packages. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Judge Harrison, the circuit judge sent by the governor, performed the service himself after thoroughly investigating the allegations against Sabrina and dismissing them as baseless. Many townspeople attended, including several who had once believed Blackwood's accusations, but had since come to recognize Sabrina's value to the community. Reverend Blackwood himself was conspicuously absent, having been summoned to Cheyenne to explain his actions to church authorities. Rumors suggested he would be reassigned to a remote parish in the Dakotas. As Sabrina and Vaughn spoke their vows beneath an arch of wildflowers, Frank Pearson stood nearby, supporting himself with a cane but standing proud as Vaughn's best man. His recovery was living proof of Sabrina's skill, a testament more powerful than any sermon. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Harrison declared with a broad smile. "Mr. Lawson, you may kiss your bride." Vaughn needed no further encouragement. He gathered Sabrina in his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of the assembled guests. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing in the ranch yard. As the evening grew late, Vaughn led Sabrina away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the creek where they had ridden on that fateful day. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "I never imagined I could find this kind of acceptance, much less love. You'll have both always," Vaughn promised, "and more besides." "What do you mean?" He grinned, boyish excitement lighting his features. "I've been corresponding with that doctor who taught you Dr. Abernathy, right? He's getting older now, looking to settle down. I've invited him to come practice in Redemption Creek with you as his partner." Sabrina's eyes widened. "A proper medical practice? Vaughn, are you serious?" "Absolutely. The town needs a doctor, and you need proper recognition for your skills. The two of you together could build something important." Tears of joy filled Sabrina's eyes. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I'm trying," he said, kissing her softly. "A good husband should." 5 years later, Sabrina stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Vaughn taught their 4-year-old son, Daniel, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played nearby under the watchful eye of Mrs. Connolly, who had become more like a grandmother than a housekeeper to the children. The Broken Arrow Ranch had prospered beyond even Vaughn's ambitious dreams. Their cattle operation now supplied beef to markets as far away as Chicago, and the horse breeding program Sabrina had suggested was producing some of the finest stock in the territory. In town, the Lawson and Abernathy medical practice had become a respected institution. Dr. Abernathy had indeed come west, and under his mentorship, Sabrina had formalized her medical knowledge. Together, they had trained several local women as nurses, creating a network of care that extended throughout the county. Reverend Blackwood had never returned to Redemption Creek. In his place, a younger minister had arrived, one who saw Sabrina's work as an extension of Christian charity rather than witchcraft. He had even encouraged his congregation to seek medical help rather than relying solely on prayer during times of illness. As Vaughn lifted Daniel down from the pony and the boy ran excitedly toward his mother, Sabrina felt a profound contentment wash over her. The accusations that had once threatened her very life had faded into distant memory, replaced by respect and acceptance. "Mama." Daniel called, his face alight with achievement. "Did you see me? I rode all by myself." "I saw, sweetheart," she said, kneeling to embrace him. "You were very brave." Vaughn followed at a more sedate pace, scooping up Elizabeth as he reached the porch. "What do you think, Mrs. Lawson? Do we have a future cowboy on our hands? Perhaps," Sabrina smiled, rising to accept his kiss. "Or perhaps a doctor. He certainly has a steady hand." "Like his mother," Vaughn said proudly. "Speaking of which, Mrs. Pearson stopped by earlier. Their youngest has the croup again. She said there's no rush, the remedies you gave her last time are helping, but she'd appreciate you checking in tomorrow if you can." Sabrina nodded. "Of course, I'll ride in after breakfast." She looked out over the land that had become her home, at the family that had become her heart. "Who would have thought, all those years ago when you came riding into town looking for help, that we'd end up here?" "I knew," Vaughn said simply, shifting Elizabeth to his other arm so he could pull Sabrina close. "The moment I saw you stand up to Blackwood that day, I knew you were something special, not cursed, just extraordinary. A blessing," she teased, recalling his words from that confrontation. "My blessing," he confirmed, "my bride, my forever." He kissed her again, deeply and thoroughly, until Daniel tugged at their legs, demanding attention. As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Sabrina Lawson looked at her husband and children and silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought a broken leg, a desperate rancher, and a determined healer together on that spring day 5 years before. From persecution had come purpose. From suspicion, love. From accusations of curses, the greatest blessing of all, a family built on respect, trust, and an unshakable belief in each other. And as Vaughn gathered her and their children close to watch the day's final light fade into gentle twilight, Sabrina knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginnings, led exactly where they were meant to go.